You're a writer. You're a words person, a letters person, a sentences person. But as I hear so many of my writers tell me in my job as a writing coach, you're not a numbers person. If you were a numbers person, you wouldn't be a writer. You're a creative. You don't have time for math, for analytics, for metrics, for that sort of data in your life. Or do you? Actually, when you're a writer, it's crucial that you look at certain metrics and analytics. There are certain numbers that can make or break your success as a writer. And I know that you're scared and intimidated and not interested, but believe me when I say that this really can make all the difference between success and no success, between staying at the amateur level and going pro and making an actual go of this whole writing thing and getting closer to the goal of literally being able to earn a living from your writing. You probably know, speaking of depressing numbers, you probably know that the average author only sells about 250 copies of their books if they're self-published, and it's not that much better if you're conventionally published, PS. And by the way, 250 books, you should be so lucky, because if you don't have an author platform, you're not going to be selling even close to that. That's actually a nice high number to be aiming for. And if you surpass it, you can be very, very proud. So in today's episode of the How to Be an Author podcast, I'm going to make you feel a heck of a lot better about the key metrics and analytics that you should be looking at as a writer. Things that are really going to enrich your writing, things that are going to boost your sales, things that are going to mean the world for your engagement and your author platform, all that good stuff. And also, I'll be telling you about the numbers and metrics that kind of don't matter. So you can stop focusing on those, and instead you can be focusing on the stuff that actually has some kind of an effect on how successful you are as a writer. Let's get started and do a deep dive into this very uncomfortable but very, very important issue. And I promise you that by the end of this podcast, I think you'll be feeling a lot more comfortable about the issue of analytics and metrics and data and what you should be looking at and what you don't need to look at all. If you're a writer dreaming of becoming a successful author, join me, writing coach Karena on the How to Be an Author podcast, your weekly source for writing information, inspiration, and motivation. I am writing coach Karena and I work with so many writers who are really struggling to go from amateur, aspiring, to successful. And one of the most important things that they need to learn to do is actually look at some numbers. And I know that this is not the preference for many creatives. We don't love numbers at all, but I really want to walk you through this with no drama, no stress. We're going to figure out what's going to matter and what's not going to matter in these analytics and metrics for writers. Writers should always be looking at quite a few things to measure their success and growth, but also to help you to make a plan when it comes to how you're going to publish, how you're going to sell, how much you're going to spend on services for writers. Because if you're not careful, you can quickly have these expenses going out of control. And some writers will sometimes ask me, hey, if I pay you for X number of hours of coaching, am I going to recoup my money? And I tell them, well, that kind of depends on you. And then I'll have some writers come to me when they've already spent a whole heck of a lot of money. And at that point, I'm like, you know what? How are you going to recoup this? And they'll tell me something like, oh, I'm not too worried because all I need to do is sell so-and-so number of books, or all I need to do is blah. And I look at them and I'm like, you didn't do your math right. So this is really, really important for you to be a little bit realistic about the math and about the analytics that go with writing success. So let's talk about some key metrics that you should be focusing on. And some of them are things that you probably already do. So some of these metrics you're already implicitly looking at, I promise. Some of the key metrics that you should be focusing on, one of them is writing time. Of course, you should be tracking the time you write every day. And I know that people will say something like, oh, you need to write every day. You need to write X number of hours every day. And that's absolutely not what I'm trying to say here. I'm not trying to guilt you because you're not writing enough hours. But what I am saying is track the time you spend on writing every day. In this way, you can be monitoring your progress. Maybe there's a trend in terms of, maybe you're writing more sometimes, less sometimes. Maybe there's an upward trend in the number of hours spent or a downward trend. Maybe you're going to see that you're not actually dedicating enough time to your craft. Maybe you're going to notice that, hey, there's some other things that you're spending a ton of time on and none of them are writing. That's really, really important. So definitely track how much time you're spending writing every day. And also, P.S., track the other things you're doing, how much time you're taking with that. Because, if you're working an hourly job, for example, you're really concerned with the return on time investment, right? How much are you making per hour? That's a really crucial metric when you're thinking about, hey, I deserve a raise or I'm going to look for a new job or something like that. Whereas writers, we sometimes spend all this time that's essentially wasted because it runs away from us, because we're not looking at the hours spent. We're not structuring our time and paying attention to that. And I think that that can be a real mistake. So definitely challenge yourself to write down each day how much you're spending at writing and how much time you're spending on writing adjacent. How much time are you spending on your platform? All of these things are very, very useful. Another thing that you probably are looking at, and this is really useful, is word count. So I think that one important reason that you should be looking at your word count, and no, that reason is not to feel more guilty because you're not getting enough words in. One important reason is to be really realistic about how long it takes you to do a certain amount of writing or a certain amount of editing. This is a really useful thing to know about yourself because we're all different. We're all on a different timeline. We all work at a different rate. And knowing how long it realistically takes you to get stuff done will prevent you from getting into these crazy deadlines that aren't realistic for you. And also, if you're beta reading or if you're editing for somebody, you don't want to get caught in something where you promised them that you would get stuff done and then you're realizing that actually I can't get that much done in this time for any number of reasons. And that's really, really important. That was one of the challenges that I had working as an editor for my clients on top of all the other stuff. And now I'm a little bit smarter about not taking on as many clients because I work in spurts and I know this about myself because I kind of wrote down how many words I was doing, how much work I was doing in editing, how many hours I had of one-on-one writing coaching, how much time I was working on developing my content, things like that. And that helped me to see, hey, you know what? I can't take on that many writers or editing jobs in a single month. This is why I space things out. Another thing that you should really be keeping track of in terms of metrics is the feedback that you get. So don't just focus on, in general, my feedback was good or it was bad. Okay, that's not bad either. Actually, it's great to know what the trend is. But I would take notes of who actually gave you feedback and when. Was it a beta reader? Was it somebody from your writing group? Was it a professional editor? And what did they say? I think it's really important to keep track of those things so you can track your progress and you can improve your writing skills over time. And you don't forget who told you what so that you can thank them later on for all that great advice that they gave you. So that's a really crucial thing, to track that feedback. That is awesome because so many times we lose track of, the good stuff that was said and we just focus on the bad, for example. But by writing it all down and keeping track of all of that stuff, you can be a little bit more measured in how you're feeling about what kind of feedback you got and from whom. That's really, really important. Another crucial thing to track, and this is something that I used to be terrible at doing, and again, you can have all different ways of doing this, but it's tracking submissions. When you're tracking your submissions, when you're querying, when you're looking at, who did I query? When? Did I get a rejection? Did I get an acceptance? What did I do differently? This really helps you not only to know who you queried and when so that you're not querying the same person over and over again, or you're not waiting for a response for somebody that you already got a response from. Or if you tweaked something in your submission package, you can see that there's a trend now because numbers tell you so much about what you're doing that's working and not working. So look at the patterns in this data. Look at the rejections. Look at the acceptances. Look at how long things are taking. And this really helps you to be more realistic about, what you're doing in this whole process. Of course, you should also be tracking your publications. This helps you to see your progress over time, identify areas for growth, but also on your website when you're building that author platform or when you're working on your query package, you're not going to forget that, hey, I wrote an article in this magazine. That's really awesome. You can put all these magazines at the bottom of your website, and that's social proof. That's a really, really important thing that you cannot downplay. So make sure that you don't forget what you wrote for. And believe me, we forget. We start to focus on something else. And I promise you that if you were asked today to write a list of the different publications that you had, even if you didn't have that many, you'll probably forget one. The next thing that you should be looking at and tracking is social media engagement. Writers should definitely be tracking how posts are performing. This really can help you understand what kind of content resonates with your audience. Again, it's not just about numbers, but it's about trends. It's about what's working and not working. It's about tweaking things and seeing an immediate result. This is such an important part, and it's also a pretty interesting part, I feel like. When you're an author and you're writing a really nice paragraph and you're reading it to your critique group, and then they're like suggesting a few changes, and just with a couple of changes, you can take that paragraph from kind of flat to something that hits a whole different way. It's the same thing with these analytics. You can do something just slightly different in your tone on social media or slightly different in your imagery or whatever you're doing. And all of a sudden you're seeing this result and you're like, wow, this is what's resonating with my audience. And remember, you don't have the same audience as anyone else. You don't have the same strengths and weaknesses as anyone else. You've got a different voice. You've got a different method. But it's good to focus on these metrics overall because it's really, again, a question of trending, a question of progress, identifying general areas for improvement, and also just making sure that you're motivating and continuing to grow. Really, really crucial. Now that we've talked about these really, really general things that I think most of you are probably doing already, let's start to think about things that maybe you haven't given enough of a thought to, but we're going to talk about some key types of data that are important for authors or writers to be familiar with. The first one being audience demographics. This is so crucial. You've got to know who your ideal reader is and also who your actual reader is, because sometimes we've got an ideal reader and that's not who our actual reader is, which is kind of interesting, right? So look at that thing. We have a podcast episode on your ideal reader and on your reader avatar. I think that you might want to go back and take a look at that because it is so valuable. Think of things like age, gender, geography, and other types of demographic information like education or, preferences or interests, things like that. This can really help you to tailor your writing to your audience if you understand them better, but it's really crucial to do the research that's going to tell you more about those demographics. So where do you find out these things? You can find those things out from looking at the data from your website visits, different clicks in your CRM if you're sending out emails, for example, and also in your social media. You can often find things that are separated out from geography or by age, by gender, things like that. And that's really going to help. Now, another thing that's really important is an interesting type of data that I think is such as the reading habits of your reader. And you might be thinking readers are readers. No, they're not. Different types of readers for different types of genres read in different places. They read in different formats like print book or ebook or audiobook. They read in different genres. They read different numbers of books per year. This is so important for you to know because it really helps you to project yourself into the future and craft a printing and publishing strategy that suits the reading habits of your reader. This is something that's really, really important. Probably more important than market trends, even though you should be staying up to date on the market trends, including which genres are popular, what's trending, which themes are resonating with your reader right now, which marketing strategies have been working, and which ones are kind of getting old and should we retire. That's really, really important too. Another thing that I am a little bit obsessed with, and I should stop looking at it so much, I tell myself, but then I'm like, actually, it's really important. I think that the sales data of your book sales and revenue, this is so important. You need to know how much money you're making from your book. You need to know how your book is selling, and you should be looking at industry standards and benchmarks so that you can compare yourself to other authors in your genre. Not to feel bad, please, not to feel bad at all, but to know how much you should be investing, to know how much you're comfortable putting out there in terms of, what am I going to spend on? How much am I going to spend on an editor or on a cover? But also, if you're seeing other authors who are doing so much better, you've got to think to yourself, okay, how am I going to tweak my strategy so that I can get myself up there? Whenever I'm looking at my sales data, I try to see, I'll look and I'll do maybe I'll do a campaign on Instagram, for example, and I'll do something where I've got a bunch of different posts with fun images and links to buy my book, for example. Or I'll do a really fun video on TikTok, and TikTok's part of my funnel. So there's a trickle down effect where I'll tell people to go check my link in bio. So it's not just the sales data, it's also this social media engagement, right? How many comments am I getting on a video or on a post? Have I gained any followers? Have I lost any followers? Has anyone shared my post? And what kind of content's performing best for me? And this is something that can change over time. But also for me, the social media engagement is I'll look if I've done something and I've had a video that went really well, where I actually had a good call to action. I'm going to go into my CRM system, my customer relationship management system, and I'm going to look to see if I've gotten more signups and more subscriptions on my website. And oftentimes that will be the case. But now if I did a video that was really popular and I didn't have a call to action, or I didn't have a link in that post, well, then that's not going to be growing as much. So I can see that what I'm doing actually has an effect. Because here's the thing. In one of my previous podcasts, I talked about, giving energy to certain tasks and how sometimes you put energy into a certain task and it doesn't really have an effect in one domain, but it has this weird trickle down effect in a different domain. So by looking at all of your data from sales to subscriptions to engagement, that's how you can really see that what you're doing is actually having an effect. That's really crucial. And I really think that the other data you want to look at is, I was talking about looking at your writing habits and tracking how much you're writing, how much time you're spending, when you're most productive, what tools and techniques work well for you. I think this is great because, again, return on investment, time-wise, money-wise, effort-wise, this is really, really important. This is going to help you to understand not only yourself, but then your readers, your markets, and, make informed decisions about your writing, your marketing, and overall strategy. I think that's really, really important. Another important thing to look at is looking at your reader reviews. You need to pay close attention to these. This provides really valuable feedback, and you're going to be understanding what readers like and dislike about your writing. And of course, you've got the outliers, right? You're going to go on Goodreads and all of a sudden somebody was so mean and you realize that, this wasn't my reader. This person is triggered in some other way. So that's kind of an outlier, but also you might look at that and be like, what happened? Is there a way to avoid that in the future, or is it important to or not? That's a really important thing for you to be looking at. So Goodreads and Amazon, probably the best two places for you to be looking at these reviews. And then, when you're thinking about sales data, honestly, I often think that, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Apple Books, probably the main ones that you need. And then any local bookstores that you're in, you definitely want to kind of go in there and ask, hey, what's going on? What's the reaction to my book? That's a great piece of information that you can have. Another crucial thing, too many of you don't do this because too many of you don't have a website or you barely go on it. Monitor the traffic to your website and your blog. You need to understand how many people are visiting your site. Where are they coming from? Which content is driving the most engagement? What are they doing? How long are they spending there? Are they clicking on anything? You've got to know that, because if your website's just sitting there stagnant, what's it even there for? So I'm really proud when I tweak the SEO on my website and all of a sudden I'll get that email going like, congratulations, you've had a bunch of clicks on your website this week. And that tells me that I'm doing something right. Website traffic can come from any number of places, from SEO to your funnel to, a link in bio, whatever that might be. See what's driving the most engagement and the most visits and what those people are doing and what they're looking for. That's going to be really, really important. And finally, email campaign metrics, massive. What, you don't have email marketing? You're not sending emails to your people? That's really crucial. You need to be doing that. You need to have a mailing list. And this is that one thing that makes a lot of authors feel really, really bad, but it should actually make you feel good, because once you have people in email, they are paying attention to you. But you do need to check on the open rates and the click-through rates to understand how well your campaigns are performing. Are you doing titles on your emails that really aren't that compelling? You're going to find out when you have less opens than usual. Are you not having strong enough calls to action or compelling lead magnets in your emails? You're going to know, because there's not going to be the click-through rate. So this is really, really important. Doing all of these things and looking at all these numbers is going to give you kind of that holistic understanding of your audience, their engagement with their work, and your overall impact on the market as an author. If you want a bigger piece of the market, you definitely want those numbers to be trending up. You want those engagements up, the sales up, the reviews up. And the good news is there's always something you can do to make that happen. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's super easy. It's not. Now, if you are thinking of improving on all these fronts, I would really recommend that you jump in on my masterclass, From Idea to Published in 6 months, because that's going to give you everything you need to look at these numbers and to also be building these numbers and to understand how to set up all these things, from the emails to the website to your social media. Now let's talk about those numbers that don't really matter. Many times you're looking at these numbers and you're feeling guilty because you're like, I'm not getting as much as I thought. And I'm comparing myself to other writers and, I'm not on the bestseller list yet and all this stuff. And you'll look at, other writers that and they're like, yay, my book's a bestseller. This is so great. Let me give you an interesting little tidbit of information that you might be quite happy to learn. It's pretty easy to get your book to be a bestseller if you narrow it down to a really weird niche. Just saying. Right? So if your book is pretty much alone in its niche, it's going to be a bestseller in that niche pretty easily, right? With very few copies. So don't compare yourself to that. That's kind of one of those funny vanity listings where people are like, oh, yay, best-selling author. And you're like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You've got to focus on the stuff that's actually meaningful, right? If you're a best-selling author in a tiny micro niche, but you've sold 10 books, I'm sorry, you don't have meaningful engagement and revenue. You're silly. So which numbers don't matter? One of the things that doesn't matter too much, let me tell you, is the social media follower count. It's really funny. Social media follower count, a lot of people think it's important, but it's not always a reliable indicator of success. There's not always a correlation with how many followers you have and how many books you're selling, for example. So on TikTok, as my writing coach and also as my alter ego who writes books under a different name, I've got a ton of followers, a ton. But that doesn't always translate to book sales. What I like for it to translate to is engagement and quality of followers and building community. That's way more important than the number of followers. Also, one thing to know is if you're on TikTok or if you're on Instagram stories or if you're on Instagram Reels, it's not just your followers who are seeing your material. So if you keep making great material with the right hashtags and stuff that speaks to your perfect audience, you're going to get in front of them. You might still get engagement. You might still win them over without having them as an actual follower. So that's a really important thing to realize. So don't think about the vanity metrics that make you feel good and feel like, oh, I'm stacking up to everybody else and I'm comparing myself to that of other authors. That's not always helpful or productive. Some authors have been working on their platform for years and maybe you haven't. Or maybe they're super successful in this one realm and that's not something that's super relevant to your goals or to your strategy. So don't get caught up in these numbers that don't truly indicate success or growth or things that aren't truly applicable to you. It's only going to make you feel bad and it makes absolutely zero sense to be looking at it that way. So I'm curious to know if you're writing a book and you've started working on your platform and all that stuff, what kind of metrics have you been looking at? What kind of data and analytics are you looking at? And which ones make you feel really guilty? If you're a writing coach on demand person, I'm going to have actual places that you can be looking at your analytics on social media, on your website, and via email. I'm going to be explaining that whole process. But also, if you sign up for from idea to published in 6 months, you're going to have the exact how-tos on that as well. And I think that it can be really, really valuable to be looking at those numbers. So don't shoot yourself in the foot by saying, I'm a creative, I'm an artist, I'm a writer, I don't do numbers. Yeah, that's great. I don't do, basic math either, but I've had to learn to do the minimum thing so that I can start to understand statistics. I can start to understand how I'm making profit or not on my books, because that's my livelihood. That's, if you want to be a professional writer and you want to make money from your writing, you have to keep track. It doesn't just happen by magic. So if this is all sounding a little bit intimidating and you want to talk to somebody who's going to make you feel better about it, and you're trying to see how a writing coach can best help you, definitely give me a call. You can sign up on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com. There's a section for booking a call with me. That's a discovery call. It's 100% free, and you'll find out how I can best help you. Or if you're a writing coach on demand person, head over to your extra materials and you can book 15 minutes of office hours so that we can talk about this stuff, so that you can feel better about numbers and analytics and data for writers. Thank you so much for joining me. I look so forward to being with you next time. And as always, feel free to ping me via email and ask me if there's a subject you want me to talk about here on the How to Be an Author podcast. I would be only too happy to do so. So let's figure out what you want to know, what you need to know, and how I can best share that with you.
If you have any pressing writing-related questions or would like to be featured on the How to Be an Author podcast, please feel free to reach out on my website, creativeandwritingcoach.com.